And we've got the lovely message. So we are being recorded. That's good. So if any of you want to review this afterwards or somebody couldn't make it, we'll make this available for folks to listen to and watch later. So let me get on with it and introduce Steve Techie from the Computation Institute at the University of Chicago. And he's inherently familiar with Globus. I'll let him to go into further detail about his own introduction, but we had him on a couple of years ago when we were all just getting into the Globus processing and how to use it and so forth, and things have changed a lot. So he has been willing and volunteered to come back and give us an update and let us know some new things and show us what everything's all about. So I'm not going to take any more of his time, but let me encourage the group of you to ask questions and join in the conversation, and Steve will allow ample opportunity for questions and Q&A and that kind of thing. So no further ado, Steve, the floor is all yours.
All right, thank you, Kay. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right, good. Well, thank you. So this is Steve Techie from University of Chicago, and thanks for joining me today. So I thought what I'd do is spend some time just kind of updating on some of the new stuff going on in Globus. And if you haven't really seen Globus before, I'll have a quick intro of that, and you'll see sort of some samplings of various bits of it anyway. So you'll also get a good intro. But I'm going to focus more on some of the newer features over the last year or two, and even some that are hot off the press in the last week or two. So just by way of introduction, right, just to level set everybody on what is Globus, right? So again, this is, I'm University of Chicago. Globus is a service that we run out of the University of Chicago for the research community, right? And we're a big part of XSEDE. We've been part of XSEDE since the beginning, and rolling Globus out to the XSEDE communities, out to campuses, out to other national facilities and regional facilities and the like. And over time, the capabilities that we've had in Globus, our focus has really been around research data management, providing tools to help researchers manage data through its life cycle. And we've built up this set of capabilities over the last about 5 years or so as we tackle more and more aspects of the life cycle. It all started with simple file transfer. How do I schlep my data from one spot to another, right? So in this picture, I have data maybe sitting on a scientific instrument or at my campus HPC facility or my lab server, even my desktop or laptop, and I want to transfer it up to, say, my campus compute facility or to an XSEDE resource. Right, so Globus has some basic tools to do that, right? To make it very easy for me to transfer or do rsync-like synchronization of data between my accounts at different systems, right? So I can log into my University of Chicago machine, log into my XSEDE account, and move data between them. Then a couple of years ago back, we added sharing, right? So moving beyond just transfer amongst my own accounts, I also want to allow you access to my data. So maybe I have data sitting at my University of Chicago cluster or on an XSEDE resource, and I want to share it to my project team or a collaborator who doesn't have an account on that local machine, on that University of Chicago machine. So I want to make that really easy, and that's what sharing is about, right? And you'll see that a little bit in the demo and how it relates to some of the new work I'm going to be showing you. So again, just trying to make it very easy, with a few clicks to take my big research data sitting on my research storage system and share it out with my collaborators at their institutions so that they can come get that data themselves or potentially upload data into that shared space as well. The next feature we announced, a year or so back, and we rolled out over the last year into production is data publication, right? Whereas transfer and sharing are really focused on files, right? File systems, files and folders. Right, publication moves beyond that, extends those capabilities to start dealing with things like metadata and identifiers and this sort of stuff. And I'll definitely talk in more detail about this later because this is one of the new major features I want to show you all. But it basically, think canonical use case here is I have some data sets that I want to publish, whether globally, maybe associated with a paper I just published, or maybe I want to publish it to a project team or a community. How do I provide the tools and workflows to make that easy for users to do that? That's the publication side. Put it in repositories or collections, and then have capabilities like curation so that people can then come along and discover that. Search for data with particular properties based on its metadata, find it, download it, and then do what they want to do with it. Maybe that's reproduce my research. Perhaps it's combining that data with their own or extending my research, right? Basically given the tools to make this whole workflow easy. course, we do this all as a cloud service, right? So you just need a web browser. We also have REST APIs and that, and I'm going to talk a lot more about that later because that's another major new capability we have coming. Of course, it's all from your own storage, right? Globus doesn't do storage. We don't provide any storage. It's an orchestration service or a management service, right? You plug your storage in, we provide then these extra capabilities over that and against that. And then access using your campus credentials, another big area I'm going to be talking about today, major new capabilities that just rolled out in the last few weeks. Right, so we've been seeing tremendous growth of the service in general, but also in XSEDE. We've now, I think in the last few months, had something on the order of 1,000 distinct XSEDE users using Globus to move data around. We have several dozens of campuses subscribed and using, so happy with how it's all going. So with that, that's my quick intro to Globus. For those of you who maybe did not have the level set on it. And now I'm going to kind of transition more into some of the new features and show you what we've got going. And also, by the way, I'll pause at various points. If you have questions, feel free to unmute and speak up. In fact, I'll pause for a moment there if anybody has any questions before I go on to the new features. All right, I'll take silence as a no, not yet. So let's move on. So the big new feature that we've been working on with XSEDE for, I don't know, a good year and a half now, is, there's a project in the context of XSEDE to roll out sort of the Globus's identity platform as a platform to XSEDE. And as part of that, there was one major change we needed to make to Globus to enable this. And this was what you see here. No Globus usernames required, right? Historically with Globus, if you've used Globus prior to about a week and a half ago, it required you to go get a Globus username and password, yet another username and password that you had to deal with, in addition to your XSEDE password, in addition to your campus login, all these sorts of things, right? So, it wasn't that hard, but it was still friction, right? It still got in the way of users just using Globus and getting on with it. And so this is a big capability we just rolled out a couple weeks ago, such that now with Globus, I can just use my University of Chicago credential or my XSEDE login as my Globus login. That's all I need, and I'm off and running. I'll show you this in just a minute. So the model, we still support identity linking, which we've had for a while, but again, without requiring a Globus username in the middle of it. So the model is essentially, I have a Globus account. That Globus account has a primary identity. Again, could be my campus identity, my XSEDE identity, my Google login, right? Any of those could be my primary, and then I can have a set of other linked identities associated with that, including email addresses as a linked identity. And now this is used pervasively throughout Globus. And so let me show you what that looks like. Actually, right before I show you what it looks like, a common question I'll address right up front is, you'll see me in a moment show a whole bunch of identity providers you can use with Globus, and a common question is, how do I get my campus into this list? And there's essentially two answers to it. The first one is InCommon is supported out of the box with some caveats, where these caveats are that you need to be releasing research and scholarship attributes to CI login from your SAML provider. If you don't know what that means, contact us or ask your identity folks. But the short answer is, as long as your campus is doing a standard InCommon thing, which is this research and scholarship stuff, it will just work with Globus and we can make it show up easily. Alternatively, if you have other identity systems that are not part of InCommon, maybe a campus clusters that are not on your campus login system and that, we also will support the ability to add other identities to Globus Auth as part of our subscriptions. And essentially, you just need to be running some OpenID Connect, little simple server software on your system to do that. So with that, let's get on to demo and show you some of the new capabilities. I'm going to be showing you logging in with Globus with any identity. So what I'm going to show is using just my University of Chicago login to get into Globus and use things. We've got some new capabilities around endpoint descriptions and endpoint search. Just make it much easier for users to find their data, find the endpoints out there. Bookmarking, so I can bookmark favorite endpoints and directories and stuff like that. I'll show some of the sharing capabilities with the new identity capabilities that we've got, group memberships, and then management console, which many of you, we released over about the last year, which many of you may not have seen. that provides administrators tools to manage the activity against their own endpoints. Right. So with that, let's jump in. All right, so let me get over to a browser here. So you should be seeing the Globus homepage at this point. So let me go ahead and log in. Now what I'm going to do to log in, you see you've got a new login page if you haven't been to Globus recently. First thing I can do is pick any of a whole bunch of identity providers. Right? I said these are the in-common providers plus others. So I can search, Chicago or NERSC if I want to be using those, or XSEDE as an identity provider in here. Various campuses, Michigan, University of Michigan, those, right? So, and importantly also Google, right? So you can use your Google identities with Globus. Now, if you had a Globus username and password previously, we've sort of renamed that to be Globus ID, right? So we still have the usernames and passwords out there for transition purposes. If you need an identity, then none of these other ones, you don't have any for the others that work, great, you can use Globus ID. But it's now just one identity provider amongst many. Nothing special about it. So let's go ahead back to the Chicago and go ahead and log in to Globus using my University of Chicago identity. Right, so this will go through the normal CI login and shibboleth processes. You notice it redirects me out to my campus login system. So I can log in using my standard, at University we call our CNET ID. That's just my campus login and password. And when it comes back, I haven't logged in before with this identity. So when it comes back, it says, I don't recognize you. What do you want to do? Right? You already have an existing Globus account. If so, you can link this identity to it. But if not, let's just go ahead and create an account with this University of Chicago identity. So let's do that. Now the next screen we see here, you see I'm now in that account with Tiki at U Chicago is sort of my Globus account here. And part of the new model is as we'll talk about in a lot more detail later, is a whole model that allows other web applications to make use of this whole infrastructure you're seeing. And so we now have full consent. So this will be familiar to you if you've done things like used applications that log in using Google. Right? The first time you do that, your Google account will tell you, so-and-so application wants to make use of your Google account. Do you want to let it? It's the consent screen. This is exactly the same thing with respect to your Globus account. So let's go ahead and allow that. And now I'm in, right? So that's all it took for me to get a Globus account using my campus identity and be logged in and off and running, right? I can go into my account page so you can see it here. So for example, I've got my, you can see my University of Chicago account. There's no Globus ID anywhere to be found here. I can actually link my old Globus ID to this if I want to. In fact, let's go ahead and do that because I'm going to actually need that later. So we'll grab my Globus ID. And you see now we call it Globus ID, right? But this is just my old Globus username and password. So just for the fun of it, I'm linking it, right? So I have to also confirm my University of Chicago, my primary identity again. And so now you see I've got my University of Chicago and my Globus ID linked, but I don't need that Globus ID if I want to, right? So I can also get rid of it very easily here in my manage consent. So it's whoops, I didn't mean to rescind consent, I meant to unlink. Let me log back in again. So you can see you can also rescind consents of your various web applications and make sure you get everything logged out and shut down as a result of that, which I just did by accident. So I want to manage these identities. Let's remove my Globus ID again. Right, so now back to having just my University of Chicago identity. That's all. So now I can use Globus, right? So I can go in and do various things. So let's go ahead now and show you some of the new endpoint search capabilities we added. Right, one of the feedback we've got over the last while as the number of endpoints have grown with Globus, right? We now have over 10,000 active endpoints, storage systems. Endpoint's just a storage system connected to the Globus cloud, right? There's now over 10,000 of them, several thousand servers, all the national facilities, pretty much, a lot of major and minor universities, smaller universities. Are all on here. Lots of personal endpoints, right? I can very easily connect my own laptop or desktop as another storage system, right? So we have a lot of these, and it was just becoming very cumbersome to find what you were looking for, to find the endpoints. Do I have an endpoint at the University of Chicago? Well, I should be able to search for it, right? And ask that question. And for example, you can see you see RCC Midway. This is our campus research computing system. Or if I'm a University of Michigan user that uses Flux, I'd like to be able to search for that. And I can say, oh, there's UMich Flux available as an endpoint. I've got my XSEDE, all the XSEDE ones in here that I can look at. So, and I can search for, various things to hone in on endpoints, right? So we've added a nice search capability to this. We'll see my endpoints later as I do some sharing, and I'll show you bookmarks in a moment as well. But let's go ahead and pick my University of Chicago cluster, right? So now, because I logged into Globus using my University of Chicago identity, and because this particular endpoint expects a University of Chicago identity, we're able to give single sign-on end-to-end through all of that, right? If I were to go to another endpoint, so let me go, say, to XSEDE, Gordon, I've got an account there. In this case, I think I've actually probably did use this account recently. If I haven't used it recently, it will prompt me just to log in with my XSEDE identity, right? So none of that's changed since before. But we do have some new capabilities. For example, like I can say, take this my project directory and let's bookmark it. Right? I can say save this bookmark. Oh, interesting. Getting some error there. Let me go over to my bookmarks. Oh yeah, this is probably left over from previous demos. So let me go ahead and delete my. I'm having a few bookmark problems here today. Well, I'll have to go figure out what's going on with that. I wonder if it's because I've been sort of linking and unlinking and playing with this account a lot to get it all working. Let's see. Let's try creating a new bookmark over on Gordon. Let's see if that works. Yeah, so I can say create a bookmark, my Gordon home directory. Right, I can give it whatever name I want. Right now, you can see I've added my Gordon home directory as a bookmark, and now it's available in the search system as a bookmark, so I can very quickly and easily, get back to that location. Right. So we have bookmarks as well. So again, just trying to make things easier and easier for the end users to make use of this. So now let's go ahead and show what sharing in groups looks like with this whole new identity capability we've got. Right. So again, I'm just logged into this University of Chicago machine. I've got this folder here. It's just a GPFS file system on our Research Computing Center. I've got a folder here that I would like to share with other users. So let me go ahead and do that. And say share. I can create a name for it, so I can call it Campus Champions Demo. So one of the things we've improved greatly with Globus now is if you remember our old endpoint names, they were really kind of cryptic. So now I can have any names I want. I can put descriptions against this. My Campus Champions Demo endpoint. Right, I can put keywords, XSEDE, Tiki, Campus, right, things like that. Right, so these are all things that now will apply to search so that people can find these endpoints. Again, subject to the access control rights. But let's go ahead and create that. All right, so now I've got an endpoint created, and you can actually see it here. If I go over to my endpoints, you'll now see that this endpoint, the shared endpoint I just created, is in my endpoints. And that should look a lot like this because it's the same folder, right? It's the same data. It's just ways to talk about how to get to this. But having done that, I can now set permissions on this, again, using any identity. I'm not now just restricted to Globus names. So for example, I can go out here and search for Tiki, and you'll see I've got a bunch of different accounts, different identities, different logins with systems. I've got an XSEDE account, my Globus ID, Argonne, NERSC, NCSA, University of Chicago. There are lots of them out here, right? So let's go ahead and say, let's share this with my Argonne identity, right? So this could be, maybe I know my colleagues' Argonne login name, their email address. Great, I'm good to go. I can just say, share with them. I can send an email if I want to. You'll even notice that Globus was smart enough, because it's seen this tiki@anl.gov identity, and that identity reports that the email address associated with that is this address. It's smart enough to sort of bring all these bits together so that I can very easily send a message, here's my endpoint, right? And send add the permission to allow tiki@anl.gov to access this. Now the sharing model has changed a bit. We've simplified it. So it's a little more like Google Docs, if you ever use that, where I've now shared to tiki@anl.gov. Now, if there is an account out there that has tiki@anl.gov linked to it, they have immediate access to this endpoint. Now, surprise, surprise, I have an account out here running in another browser that you can see that has tiki@anl.gov linked to it, right? And I'm going to show you how this linking works in just a moment with another one. But since I've got that, I can just go to that, go over here, go out to search, Campus Champion, there it is, and I have immediate access to that shared endpoint. Now I also have email waiting for me over here telling me, that's the wrong account, telling me that I've got that I've got this stuff waiting for me. But now that I've shared this, I can go get access to it. So for example, in this other account here, I'm logged into NERSC, and I can say, let's transfer some data out of my University of Chicago machine, that one folder that's been shared with me with my tiki@anl.gov access, and we'll take file 3 and transfer it out to NERSC. All right, I can't do anything more here. I can't add anything because I haven't been given permissions, but I can give permissions. So let's go ahead and try it again. Now I can create a folder, and now I can even upload data to that University of Chicago endpoint from NERSC. Right? So it made it super easy to just share folders straight to identities without having to go through all of the stuff of creating accounts and all that. All just kind of works, right? But I can also do, that's for an account that already has their identity working with Globus. But what about an account that doesn't? Right, so let me clear this one and revoke that access. So now if I refresh this, we'll see, authentication failed. I can't get to that endpoint anymore. Let's try a different identity. So I made sure before this demo that my XSEDE identity was not linked to any accounts. So let's go ahead and do that. And again, you see from my XSEDE profile, this is the email address associated with my XSEDE profile. It knows, okay, that's the email address that I should use when I want to talk to tiki@xsede.org, because tiki@xsede.org is not a real email address. It's just a sort of a name, an identity name. So let's try it. Let's go ahead and invite that one. Right, so now emails should have been sent to that services@tiki.com. We come over here again just to show you that my XSEDE identity is not linked to this account. In fact, it's not linked to any account at the moment. If I come over to my email account, we should see the invitation, right? We say, see, Globus user Tiki has shared this folder, the Campus Champion demo, with tiki@xsede.org. To get access, click here. So let's go ahead and do that. And we get to my account. I'm logged in this account, but it doesn't have an XSEDE on it, so it tells me, right? You're invited to access this endpoint as tiki@xsede.org, but it's not linked. So let's go ahead and link it. Drops me into the linking flow, says link tiki@xsede.org. Why? Because somebody wants to share with you. Takes me out to the XSEDE login. I log in with my XSEDE account. Brings me back. Every linking activity, you always have to authenticate both the thing you're linking and your primary identity so that we know things are really, you're really intending to do this, and we've got a good, strong identity link between these two. So let's go ahead and do that. Now we got one little caching bug that okay, sometimes, occasionally, this will show up access denied, and you have to wait a few seconds before it'll work, but we're fixing that now. But it looks like it all worked nicely this time. So now I'm in. Right, so that's all there was to it, right? So all I really did there was added my tiki@xsede.org identity to this account, and now by virtue of doing that, I have access to that data, right? I can now get to that endpoint, right? So again, we've really simplified down the sharing to work very nicely with all of our identities, right? So people, if they know I'm tiki@uchicago.edu, they can just share to it. It works with all those identity providers. It also works with email addresses. So if somebody just knows my email address and it's not even a full identity, it's not my campus identity, not Google, it's just an email address, we can even use that for purposes of sharing, right? So we've really made this much more streamlined for our community, for campus users to make use of this. Last thing I'll show with respect to the identities is the groups capability. So I'll take away that permission from that endpoint and say, instead what I want to do is I want to create a group over here and I'll invite somebody to it, right? So let's go ahead and create a new group in my TKU Chicago account. Again, we'll call it the Campus Champions Demo Group, for lack of a better name. Yes, I can put some description in there. We'll say it's viewable by all users, create the group, and we're in. The other thing I'm going to do here, whoops, I don't want to delete the group, I want to hit the policies. I'm going to make it so any members of the group can see other members of the group. And there's a bunch of policies about invitations and who can join and all that sort of stuff. But now I've got this group, and let's go ahead and invite that same Tiki at XSEDE. Actually, let me just go ahead and do a search again for this, right? So I can search for identities. There it is, and again, you see it picked up the right email. So it says, let's go ahead and send an invitation to join this group, right? Now I can jump over to this account. Again, remember this account has tiki@xsede.org in it. I can now basically just go into the group system, and I'll see the invitation here. I also have an email in my email that has a link that I can follow that takes me right to this page as well. Accept invitation. Yep, accept my invitation to join members. So you can see now I'm a member of this group. If I come back over here, go back to members and refresh this, you can see, great, now I've got, Tiki at Chicago is the admin of the group, tiki@xsede.org is a member of the group, and now everything else just works, right? So now I can share to that group. I can jump back over here, pick my endpoint, bring up the permissions on it, say this time let's share to a group, select the group. In fact, you can even see it knows I'm a member of that group, so it makes it very easy for me to add that. And add permission, right? So now I've shared with that group. And again, if I look over here, this user is a member of the group, so I should be able to go right out here back to Campus Champions Demo, and it works again, right? So again, we've sort of wired this really clean identity capability through everything we've done here. The last bit I'm going to then show of new capabilities, so that's all the identities and how they work with groups and sharing, some of our new endpoint search and bookmarks. The last bit I'm going to show is Management Console. Right, so this is another new capability we added not too long ago. I've actually got to log out of this account. Actually, I don't have to log out. Let me link that Globus ID back here again. Because I've got my management permissions are all tied to my Globus ID account currently. So let me go ahead, get my Globus ID. So now I've got my Globus ID, tiki@globusid.org, linked to my U Chicago account. Now I should be able to go out to the Management Console. Nope, that didn't work quite as I expected it. Interesting. Okay, let me try one other thing. I realized the way I tried it earlier was a little different, so we're still updating the Management Console piece of code for all the identities. So let me unlink that for the moment. Go out, log out, and log back in with the Globus ID directly within its own account. You know it's a real demo when it doesn't work exactly as planned. All right, now I'm logged into a brand new account. I just went and created a brand new account with my Globus ID as my primary identity. Now, if things are sane, that should work, right? So now I'm to the Management Console. So what we've built here is, one of the feedback we got a lot of from endpoint administrators was, I've got, great, my University of Chicago endpoint, but I'd like to see what's happening on my endpoint. I want to know what users are using my endpoints and what sort of faults and problems they may be hitting, right? And sort of control and manage the behaviors of my endpoint so that I can give a better quality of experience to my users, right? So if there's faults happening, I can intervene proactively, right? I can just see what's all going on. That's what this Management Console is all about, right? I've been given rights on the XSEDE endpoints, my own endpoints, and the University of Chicago Midway endpoints. So that's what you're seeing here in the graphic. I can hover over the various systems and see what transfers are currently happening with these different systems. And I can drill into them as well. So I can go into individual hosts or just look at all the active tasks currently against these systems. Let's actually restrict this in on, let's pick the, I don't know, let's pick Stampede, right? So I can say, let's only look at certain endpoints and tasks that are happening. I can look at certain, I can search for one. So I can say UC RCC hash midway. Right, so I can look at just those. I see there's some error currently happening there, so I got a quota exceeded error, right? So I can jump in and see what's happening. So look at the event logs, right? So I can see I've got a user having problems here, and if I want to intervene, I can. We also have features like pausing. So if I've got a task that's really hammering my system and causing me problems, maybe I want to cancel it, maybe I want to pause it. I could cancel it with the X, or I could pause the individual task here. We can even set up pause rules where I can say things like any new submission to Midway by username Tiki, and then pause everything they're doing, right? So that way I can not shut them down entirely. I can even do things like say, let them submit new transfers, but pause any of their actual tasks, right? So this is really useful if you're putting systems into maintenance mode or have users that you want to pause their stuff while you're fixing things, stuff like that. Right, so it's a full-up management console that allows you to control the activity and manage the activity on your endpoint. We also have usage reports so that as a subscriber, as a campus that's subscribing, you can get a monthly report with graphs as well as a complete CSV dump of everything going on against your endpoint. So if you want to slice and dice how users are using your endpoint, what data they're accessing, which users are accessing, all that sort of stuff, that's all now available as well as part of the subscription. All right, I'll pause there for a minute before I go on to data publication and discovery. Any questions with all these new identity features and these other things I've shown? All right, I assume somebody's still out there, hopefully. All right, so let me go ahead and move on with the data publication discovery. Right. So as I mentioned earlier, this is a new capability that we introduced over about a year ago and have rolled out over this last year, with this real with the goal of, as I said, moving beyond just files and really being able to talk about these other dimensions of data and data access. Right. So, and particularly around data publication workflows. So some of these other dimensions that that this tool helps manage for the users is some of these things you see here. So things like identifiers, right? A very common thing that's starting to evolve in the community is if I have data sets that I want to publish associated with a paper, I need to assign a persistent identifier like a digital object identifier or DOI to go with it. That's something that needs to be managed, right? The assignment of these. But there's also use cases where I don't need a full-up DOI. In fact, don't want one because they have certain requirements on persistence and otherwise. So maybe I want some lighter weight schemes like handles or simple URLs. I'd like to associate metadata with all this. Maybe it's standard metadata like data site, which goes along with DOIs for sort of standard metadata for publication. But I may also want domain specific or very custom metadata associated with my data sets. Or maybe none at all, right? Maybe it's I just want the identifiers and some of the other capabilities. Curation, right? The whole model that we've got is built around the notion of collections as maybe a community or a institution, a campus, a department, right? You can create collections for particular purposes. Even a lab might create its own collection just for managing its own data set, sort of internal publishing, if you will. But you might want to curate that as well so that anybody who submits a data set into this collection, it goes through some curation process, maybe just simple acceptance or rejection, maybe a human validates and looks at the data, some machine validation on that potentially as well as the direction we're going with this. Access control, right? Sure, I may want to make it completely publicly available data, but not always, right? I may want to do like embargoed data or even just publish to my project or my lab team or my collaborators, right? So I still don't, for us, data publication is not just that full up, must be out there publicly to everybody. It's really about managing these policies around these collections and access to that. And then likewise, preservation. How long do I need to keep this data around for? Now, we don't store the data. Again, the whole model here is when you set up your collection, you decide where you want this data to live, and then you can set the policies on the backup and archival and all these sorts of things to ensure whatever preservation. Let's get past that slide. So the idea here is that we want to enable these sort of notions of publication across the life cycle of data, not just in that final artifact, right? So maybe I have something like a sequencer that's producing the raw NGS output, and it's got some metadata associated with it around, the instrument, capture conditions, timestamps, parameters, all this sort of stuff. But I want to get it captured. I want to get a unique identifier associated with it. I don't need any curation. No human needs to be in the loop on this, but I do want to get it captured, identified, some metadata, and into a collection where it can be searched and managed and all that. Well, that's one of the uses of our data publication system, just turning sort of the knobs on curation and identifiers and all that in the right way. And I might want it stored out in some place with good durability, but it, I might want low cost for archival purposes. But then I run some downstream analysis on this, and I get some interesting results that I want to make available to my project team. Again, I'd like to maybe capture these results as a data set with an identifier, with metadata, but only make it available to certain people, but make it available on widely available fast storage so they can really get access to it. And then later I come along and write my paper, and I need to make the data set available associated with that paper. Again, I'd like to have the tools to allow me to capture the necessary metadata for that. Maybe it's double and core metadata, data site, things like that. Maybe the particular collection or publication requires certain types of things to be published, not just the data sets, but the virtual machines for producing the data sets may all be part of it, right? We can do all that and describe that in the metadata. Now I may really want curation, right? So maybe it's going into a collection that's run by the journal or run by the campus or run by a community, and they want to review the data, make sure it's all good before it's submitted, get a digital object identifier associated, and get it out there in a form that's publicly available to anybody, right, and downloadable and usable for reproducibility or extension of my results, right? So these are the sorts of use cases and problems that we're trying to deal with the data publication. So let me give a quick demo of that. So I'm logged in here, make sure I'm in the right account. Yep, logged in here in my Globus ID account. So let me go ahead over, we have a trial publication system that any of you can use as well. Let me go ahead and log into it. Again, consents on using it. All right, so I'm logged into the trial system. Now, this account has some rights that are already pre-configured against some communities, right, and collections. So remember what I said earlier, the model is that people who have the right permissions can create a collection. A collection is just a set of data sets bound by a set of policies, right, in terms of access and metadata and these sorts of things. So for example, let me go in and take a look at one of these collections that I have access to and show you the sorts of controls that I have on a collection when I create it, right? Of course, I have things like names and descriptions. I can associate license text with this, license for people submitting into this collection, as well as a distribution license for people when they download. As I said, we don't do storage, right? You say, where do you want it to go? So any shared endpoint can be the storage location for a collection. We put the data sets, the metadata, everything on there, right? So there's a completely self-standing piece of data or data set there on your storage. Define what sort of identifier schemes you want to choose, whether it's handles or digital object identifiers. And we do this, like, for example, with DOIs and handles, we do this out of your university's namespace, right? So again, we're just a management tool. You own the data, you own the DOIs, right? And we're just providing the tools to make it easy to sort of orchestrate these actions. Workflows, I can say what sort of metadata I want to require, right? You can see this one's configured for these different levels of data site. We can have custom input forms and do that sort of as consulting action with us. You can come to us and we'll work with you to get the right metadata that you want. You can define what sort of curation, do they have full edit rights or just accept, reject, and then access control, who's allowed to submit, who's allowed to access the data, who are the curators, and all of those just use standard Globus groups as the way to configure all this, right? So we have lots of good controls on setting up and managing collections. So let me show you what it looks like to actually submit something and take it through the workflow. All right, so I'll say, let's submit to, and any of you can submit to this open trial, curated or uncurated collection that's on the trial system. So let's go ahead and I'll submit to the curated one. So like I said, feel free to play with this. The only constraint is at the moment, for a few more days, you need a Globus ID to do this. That constraint will go away in a couple days as soon as we roll out. In fact, I think tomorrow when we roll out the new version. So I'm going to submit into this. First step is I have to agree to the submission license. Now I have metadata forms. You can see I got a few forms where I can fill in different sorts of metadata for these different data site fields. So I can have my title, so I'll call it Tiki Campus Champions Demo Feb 25. If I can type authors Tiki, year 2016, publisher Globus. If I could type Globus. And then I can continue, right? So that's my first bit of metadata. Now I've got a few other forms that this collection asks for, so I can add keywords and descriptions and all these things that can now be used for search on this data set and even into some other metadata, right? So, each collection can be configured with what metadata you want to be prompting the user for. So now I've specified my metadata, and as soon as the browser comes back, now I assemble the data, right? So the model is I have my metadata. Now I need to pull together the data that's part of my data set. And to do that, surprise, surprise, it just uses Globus, right? So what it did behind the scenes is since a data set is simply a folder living in a shared endpoint as configured by the collection, it's gone out and created a folder for me in that shared endpoint for this data set. And now it's my job to populate that with whatever I want, right? So if I go back to UChicago, grab a couple files here, transfer them over, I could go in, say, create a new folder, stuff, whatever I want to put in there, right? And upload various, various stuff into that. And so it's up to me to assemble, and it's really up to the collection to say what's the required data that needs to be in the data set, right? So it can, during curation, say, no, it has to be certain types of data, stuff like that, right? So I've now assembled my data. We'll jump back over here, continue, do one last verification as soon as the screen loads. One last verification of my metadata that I entered. I can see there's a couple of transfers. Yep, good, they're all in. Great, let's finalize it. So now we're submitting it off into the collection, right? This collection has been set up for curation, so it's not, the data set hasn't been published yet. It's not yet available as part of the collection, but rather it's been submitted, excuse me, to the curators for approval. So let me jump back over to this browser where my account here, go to trial and log in. My SJT account is set up as a curator on this. So we should see now here, right there, that there's the task that was submitted into this collection. So as the curator, I can now say, let's go ahead and take a look at this thing that was submitted. Yeah, we'll accept the task. I can now go in, approve, reject, or I can even edit the metadata against this. Let's go ahead and approve it. After I've done my extensive evaluation of it, and now it's been published, right? So now a handle has been associated with this, so now I've got a persistent identifier that I can give to other people, that I can include in papers, I can link into various other systems that will always take me back now to a landing page for this data set, right? So if you're familiar with the data site model, it's very, very similar, basically that same kind of model, right? So I've got my landing page. If this was a DOI that this collection was set up, a DOI would be issued and would be linking to this. And now I can see the metadata. I have tools if I want to see citation formats that I can download, right? So I can plug them in easily to my papers. I have the metadata. I have the data itself. So if I want to download that data, I can simply click on the link, and it pops up the Globus page here with that data set selected. The data itself is in the folder here, and now I can go download that data set. So I could say go to NERSC. Let's directly download this entire, I'll actually go back up, take the data and all the metadata, and we'll put it in a new folder called data set out at NERSC. Download, and we're off and running, right? So now I've got this data set that had been published by one user, and now I'm able to download it directly to my research computing cluster and go off and start doing further work with that data set. And I'm off and running, right? We also have search capabilities, right? So if I come back over here, refresh this page, you'll see it's now done, but now I can go in and search and say, let's search for Tiki Campus Champions. If I can type, shouldn't matter, there it is. Same landing page, and I'm off and running, right? So again, and this search is subject to access control. So I'm only allowed to see data sets from collections that I've been given rights to, right? And so the real system for this, so I've just been working on the trial system. If I go back over to here to my Globus and hit the publish link, it'll actually take me out to the production publish system, where you can see these are actual communities that are starting to use this system for publishing real research data, right? So we have the trial system just so we don't clutter up the production data set and the search and all that sort of stuff, right? So for example, we have this metadata facility community that has a set of collections in it and data in it. So that's what we have. I think that's it for publication discovery. Any questions on that before I go into sort of the platform side of things and finish things off here?
I do have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
And well, first, I am a newbie here, so it may be maybe a stupid question, but from what you were saying, it would seem to me that there must be some kind of requirements on the file systems at those endpoints, right? Because if you're building that directory equipped with metadata, it has to be a file system at least. It cannot be an object store, can it?
Actually, well, it will be very soon be able to be an object store. So we do have Amazon S3 support currently, but it's not. But we're actually going to be changing how we do it. We're going to be seeing a bunch of this at Globus World in April is where we'll be announcing a lot of this. But for example, right now we're working on support for Ceph as an object store, as an endpoint. And really, the model with Globus on any storage system is that I have my storage system and I install this piece of software called Globus Connect, which is just some simple agents, some simple local services. Grid FTP is one of the pieces under the cover. I'll be talking about some new bits in the next slide that sort of presents that storage out in a standard interface that then Globus can make use of and other tools can make use of, right? So Globus Connect does that. So we'll soon have a version of Globus Connect available for Ceph. We're going to then also be doing a new version for S3. We just got some funding to do a version for Google Drive. So you can even use that as a storage endpoint behind all this. And once it's an endpoint, then yes, it can actually be used in this way. So we will, the object stores like Ceph, we use the names, you can use hierarchical names in these object stores to make it look sort of like a file system. And yes, it's got limited capabilities. It's not a mountable file system. You can't directly work against it, but you can use it as a Globus endpoint. You can upload and download data to it. You can set sharing, all these sorts of things will still work with it. So yes, you will be able to very soon be able to use object stores like Ceph as an endpoint for publication purposes and the other things you saw here today.
Okay.
I got a question too.
Yep, go ahead.
So just to clarify, this metadata is living on Globus, right? It doesn't live in your, it doesn't interact with any of the folder structure in your file system.
Actually, it's both. So what we do is we do keep a copy of the metadata. Let me go back to the trial system to show you there again, right? So I've got this the metadata we do keep in Globus for search purposes. But when I go to download this data, you'll notice one of the files that's in this folder is globus metadata.json. So this is actually one of the things we do once that data is actually accepted for publication into the collection by the curators, or if it's automatic curation, we'll go ahead and serialize all the metadata and write it into the data set itself, right? And we're actually using a standard format called Bagit for, we're getting close to using the standard format. There's one file we're still to add to it. But basically so we've got the metadata file and then the data all lives under there, right? So you've got we do have a fully self-contained artifact of the data and the metadata all there on your stored system.
Okay, great, thank you.
And it really does go to our philosophy of, like, we're not trying to own your data. We're just trying to provide tools that make it easy to create it, manage it, access it, all this sort of stuff, right? And so that's part of why it's the way it is. Any other questions? All right, so let me go ahead into the home stretch then. One feature I will mention that's coming soon that's going to be a big add for a lot of communities, right? Today, right, with Globus, we have asynchronous bulk transfer, right? And it's using a protocol under the cover called GridFTP for this, right? That's what you've been seeing. I can do these sort of transfer jobs. Submit the request for terabytes or petabytes of data, walk away, let Globus take care of it asynchronously while I'm doing whatever else I want to do, right? But there's a lot of use cases where you really want more synchronous remote access, right? I want a client that can remotely get my data, pull it down, and visualize it. For example, genome browsers. I may want to be able to do browser-based upload and download, right? Today, if I want to download data from a endpoint, I have to install Globus Connect Personal on my laptop. I don't have it running right now, but it'll just be a menu item or a taskbar item sitting up here in the background, and it works great for the asynchronous. Yeah, go away. Somebody give me a call. So we've got we've got this need for this remote access, and so what we've been working on now for a while is solving this problem by adding HTTP support, or HTTPS support more accurately, to endpoints, so that now any Globus Connect server storage system, that is any storage system that's running the Globus Connect server software, will be able to allow access via HTTPS with full security, with completely coherent security with everything that we do on the GridFTP side. So sharing works, access works, all these sorts of things. You can share with groups and all that, but we also will allow anonymous access as well, right? So this opens up a huge number of use cases of your storage system, right? To phrase slightly differently, it means now your storage system, your research storage system, your normal file system, can be a full-fledged HTTP resource. I can have the whole ecosystem of HTTP tools be able to access this file system, again, with full security, with full OAuth-based support. This will allow us to do some interesting things in our own web app, like build browser-based upload and download to the endpoints, not just the asynchronous with Globus Connect, inline file viewers, all this sort of stuff. But also it allows some very interesting use cases with integrations of your storage systems into various other clients and web applications. So you'll be seeing a lot more of that as well in a couple months with Globus World. We're just piloting that now with a few early customers. So now let me go into the last section. I'm going to go through this very quickly just to give you a flavor of what we're doing, right? So, we've talked for a long time, right, about how cloud, this model we're pursuing that's dominant in the commercial world of software as a service for delivery of applications has really transformed how things happen. But equally important in the cloud world is this platform as a service. Infrastructure as a service is my virtual machines, virtual networks, virtual storage. In some sense, that's the least interesting part of the cloud. The platform as a service is where a lot of the action really is at. And that's sort of higher value services that make it very easy and cheap to create and operate and support really advanced web and mobile applications, right? And so a big part of what we've been really pursuing also over the last few years is building out towards this sort of question of how could we help create this ecosystem of applications, cyber infrastructure applications for the science community using these cloud techniques of platform as a service and software as a service, right? We've got in our community lots of resources that are sort of providing storage and networks and machines available, and even with things like Jetstream and XSEDE, we have now even cloud resources, virtual machine style cloud resources in addition to the supercomputers. Back 5 years ago, we started with the software as a service, but over the last year or two, we've been starting to really focus on the platform side as well. And this is going to be a lot of what you're going to be seeing from us in the coming months and year is rolling out the platform side of Globus. We've had APIs against our file transfer and sharing services for, really since the beginning, and we'll have APIs coming for data publication and discovery over the next year or so as well. But there was this, and that's being used already by a number of services. Things like KBase is a microbial genomics knowledge base out of DOE, Exeter University building data repository, CI Connect and OSG Connect and stuff like that. But what was fundamentally missing was a key bit of authorization and groups capability. And this is really the heart of what we've been working with XSEDE on for the last year and a half, to roll out this capability, sort of platform capabilities for managing users and groups. All the stuff you saw in my demos a few minutes ago in the Globus web application, making all of those same capabilities available to you to build your own, or developers to build your own web applications that leverage all of these same capabilities, all the same identities and groups and linking and transfer and sharing and all this stuff. And so for a good example of this is a group out of NCAR, National Center for Atmospheric Research, that runs something called the Research Data Archive. It's a system that's been around for a couple decades, a few petabytes worth of climate and environmental data that has a community of roughly 30,000 people who download data from this archive, right? And it's a web app. I go into it, search for my data sets, find the data, and click download, right? And historically, when I click download, it would give me a web link to download or a wget script that I would run to pull this data over HTTP. The problem was this model was falling under the weight of the data, right? As the data volumes and data set sizes were growing, it just didn't really work. And so we've been working with them for the past year on integrating that repository with Globus so that now users can say download with Globus, right? And a fundamental part of that was this same Globus Auth, the same identity and access management stuff you saw me demo in the application, making all of that available to RDA and other web applications. So all the things we're doing in our web application, all the things our own transfer service are doing are also available to you, right? You can tie in your identity providers, a resource server or a service, it's just a service with a REST API. We can help manage all that, provide all the security glue to it, right? So we've got this great new capability that we're starting to roll out that makes it very easy for developers to get all this advanced security capability trivially into their applications, and B, link it into the whole ecosystem, right? So that now if you use this capability in your own web application, you can now call Globus APIs. XSEDE APIs will be rolling out in the coming months that uses all this capability. Third parties like RDA and their REST APIs. We're creating this sort of ecosystem, and it's all based around these standards of OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect at the middle of it, which means you can also use standard libraries. For example, we use the Google OAuth client libraries as the way to some of our services work with all this. Right, so it means now web applications can do things like, say, download with Globus, right? And we can take care of mediating those actions. And a key part of this is also really getting the data out of the web portal and into where it really belongs, into the managed storage, in the science DMZs, behind the DTNs where you have good networks, good storage, good access points on this, so you can really handle all this. And that's really what we're enabling with this. And of course, with the HTTP, fits right into this story super well as well. So now these web applications and mobile applications can also get direct access to this storage via HTTP. And so we've been working with various groups. One of the first is the Jetstream web application rolled out, and it even rolled out its own resource servers, web app plus its own REST services that use this whole model, right? And we even support sort of call stack, so I could have, your service can call the Globus service, which in turn calls something else. Support for mobile applications coming very soon here in terms of the login, right? So if you've ever had a mobile app on Android or iOS that does login with Globus or login with Google or Facebook, via sort of browser using the mobile browser, it'll be exactly the same thing. The support here as well, right? So our real goal is to unlock the smaller developers, the mom and pop shops, if you will, as well as the bigger groups, to create compelling web applications for the science world and to create an ecosystem of integrated interoperable applications. So that's a big thing we're working on. So just a quick ad, we're at Globus World in late April. We're going to be running a day-and-a-half developer workshop and hackathon all around what I've been talking about for the last 5 minutes. So if you want to learn more, that's a great place to come learn it. And then last note, again, I'll mention if you don't know, right, Globus, we're a nonprofit service out of the University of Chicago, but we have a sustainability model based around subscriptions, right? We actually want to be around a decade from now doing this stuff and providing these capabilities. And so we have, models for campuses to subscribe to these advanced capabilities. The XSEDE has a subscription for all of its systems and its users, right? So just wanted to mention that. So in summary, right, this is what we've been up to over the last year or two, is really focusing on improving both our software as a service, the end user capabilities, for researchers to just get their work done quickly and easily on your campus with XSEDE, with other national facilities, with your own systems, right? That's the web, the SaaS. But then with the PaaS, the platform as a service, really opening up these new opportunities for developers to really leverage a lot of these same capabilities themselves. Of course, I'd like to thank our sponsors, many of them. And with that, I'll end and take any more questions. That's the end of the, formal presentation. So feel free to drop off if you're done, and want to thank you very much. But I can stick around as long as you want and answer more questions.
Well, thank you very much. I do have a general question. I've been thinking about using Globus for a variety of purposes, and the problem that I've had, by the way, this presentation was great, but the problem that I've had is the lack of information, how Globus works, and sort of the things that you were presenting today that I could access either online or through some white papers. It's just very hard to find more technical descriptions of how Globus works.
Yep, that's a completely fair statement, and one we're all too aware of. One of the things we've been working to try and get this new identity capability out, because it changes a lot of those details. So we're actually going at right now, starting to recreate some of our materials. We've got a new site that we did launch fairly recently that will be the home for all this, called docs.globus.org. And here you can find, particularly, we've got some guides, for example, resource provider guide. This is information about how you install Globus Connect server against your storage system, some information about using, for example, data publication, the management console, command line interface, right? So we've got some guides here. The transfer API itself, this is the REST API for building your apps against it. So we're starting to get some of this material, but yeah, it's a completely fair criticism that we don't yet have enough, particularly the sort of intro guides, sort of how to get started, understand, here's a use case that Globus can help you solve.
Right.
How do I do it?
Yeah, on some middle kind of level for people who know a little bit about this, but not too much.
That's right.
Because I find some of your cartoons, on the other hand, too simplified,
right,
to the point of confusion, actually. So, I know it's difficult and I know it's time consuming, but I think that would help us, the potential clients, to decide whether Globus is something for us or not, because sometimes we get just pushed away by jargon or by those cartoons that nobody can figure out what they really mean.
Yeah, That's completely fair. One thing I will volunteer to is that I'm more than happy to do webinars like this and more general demos and intros and stuff like that. At any time. I do a lot of these. So, if you want to set up, for example, a webinar for your campus, for your research computing community or project, things like that, just reach out to us, and we're more than happy to do customized ones of these for your community and have discussions about how it applies in that. But that said, that's not also a substitute for having some of the material you're asking for.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yes, I do have a question about the Google Drive integration. I think that could be useful in some cases of research where it's possible to dump data on the Google environment it's not that sensitive. So when do you anticipate and manage it? Because Google doesn't have great group management, I think. So when do you think this capability will come around?
Our target is to have it by early fall. There's a bit of development work we have to do on it, but it should be coming this calendar year. And if you're interested in this, drop us a note, because we definitely would like to hear. You can always send mail just to support@globus.org, and that'll, the general queries and expressive interest will find its way to me also. So we definitely want to hear who wants this. What drove the request was a customer who, you've got Google Apps for Education, of course, out there now that a lot of organizations and campuses are subscribing to, with one of the options on that being unlimited storage, right? And so, it's a good place potentially for researchers to actually put a bunch of data. The problem is the access to that data. The models are not very good for the research world, right? Yeah, I can do desktop sync, but how do I get the data to and from my analysis systems, and, as you say, share it well with my community and that sort of stuff? And so the request, basically, they were starting to roll this out to their users, and the thing that came back from their users is, we want a Globus interface to this, because that's what we use as our way to manage our research data and get it to and from the various places we need it, right? So that's what's driving this.
Right, and I think, because looking at it closely, this is something to explore. Here are the disadvantages of Google Drive is how hard it is to manage permissions for the files. It's almost, you would have to go to each individual folder and make sure they have the right permissions.
Yep.
And the uploader usually has the ownership. So if a researcher is handing their work to the faculty member has to make sure that ownership transfers. Otherwise, research will be lost as soon as the main owner doesn't give ownership. So I think this could complement this effort. I'm not sure if this is what you envision, but I think if we're on the same page, that's pretty good.
Yep, that's the sort of stuff we're trying to support.
Okay.
I should also mention that we're actually negotiating with a customer right now to fund Box support as well, because a lot of campuses are of course rolled out Box and would like to do a similar sort of thing with that. And then we're also in some discussions on the Microsoft Azure front. So if you're interested, again, in any of those, we would definitely like to hear from you.
Okay.
In terms of desire and interest and use cases, why do you want it? What do you want to support? If it's like Azure, which parts of Azure? Is it Azure storage, the OneDrive, the data? What do they call it? Basically the Hadoop environment, right? So definitely let us know what you're after. We'd like to get that sort of feedback, and hopefully that'll help motivate some of this to happen.
And actually, it won't be a bad idea to develop use cases for each. So this gives a lot of people, an already set up workflow of how this technology can be used. So I'm not against working on a use case and figuring out the best potential for Globus in that with this regards.
Good, thanks.
Thank you.
Steve, in terms of all of the different IDs that are linked together, are they all co-equal, or is one considered a primary ID?
Yeah, the model is one's considered a primary ID. If I go back and show you what, whoops, I got to get back to the right spot here. Just get logged back in here. Actually, I've got it in the other browser. That'd be even easier. Right, so the model is that one of them is the primary identity, and then the others are linked to it. Now, there's actually some interesting capabilities we've got, particularly more from the platform side, where, so for example, XSEDE and the Jetstream app, one of the things that we can support is say the Jetstream app requires that the user have an XSEDE identity linked to their account. Otherwise, if it don't, it will actually stop you during the login and say, the app you're trying to log into, the Jetstream web app, requires an XSEDE account. Please link your XSEDE account to this, right? So it has the mechanisms to sort of get the right identities to the right clients for the right purposes. Right now, they are, as you say, kind of co-equal, right? One of the things that's on our backlog, our agenda for, hopefully later this year, will be even adding things like level of assurance support, where I can say for particular purposes, I need particular identities and even particular authentication schemes. Maybe I need two-factor for certain purposes, or I need to have authenticated in the browser session within the last 15 minutes to accept it, things like that. So we're going to be building out what's the sort of semantics and capabilities around the identity set, but at the heart of that set is the one primary and a set of linked.
And is there any issue at all if one loses access to the primary? So, for example, if you leave a university which you've used as your primary ID?
Let's see. It's a complicated answer, but the short answer is we've architected it to deal with that case. And one of the key bits about what we did here is we did not introduce yet another identity or identifier of this set. Everything in the model is based around the identities themselves. So what the implication of that is that if somebody has, for example, what you're seeing here on the screen, right? My primary identity is this SJT at Globus ID, and then I've got these linked identities. Suppose I were to lose SJT at Globus ID for some reason, right? It means that any shared endpoints that were shared to SJT at Globus ID and any groups that I was a member as SJT at Globus ID, yeah, I'd lose access to those, but I would not lose access to all the other ones. So I can always reconstitute my account with a different primary and a different set of linked identities. And as long as the resources were shared and that sort of stuff with those other identities, I'm good to go, right? So yes, there's some things tied to the primary identity, or some things tied to every identity, arguably, right? So if I lose any of them, I could lose access to those resources that were shared with it. But because things are with identities, I can sort of reconstitute the set in interesting ways over time. And with services that understand the set model, like all the Globus transfer and sharing and those tools, one of the things that has bit me a couple times in doing this demo is when I unlink and relink and this sort of things, all the assets go with that identity, right? So the transfers and everything else. So sometimes it's actually hard to even show restarting the demo from scratch because I've used Tiki at UChicago before, and there are assets associated with that identity, right? So does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So the specific scenario we did work through was, what if I change institutions, right? So my Tiki at UChicago goes away and I'm moving to Argonne, right? And in those sorts of cases, yeah, I can create my new Argonne account, maybe set it up as my primary, relink all my other identities to the Argonne account rather than the UChicago identity, and all the assets associated with those other identities will then sort of go along with it. All right, what else?
Anybody have any other questions for Steve while we got him here? Steve, I want to thank you for taking time to put this together for us. This has been terrific. Since you were here last, there's been lots of changes, so I'm glad to hear about those.
Great, yeah, thank you so much for giving me the time, and thanks everybody for attending.
Right, and now we'll post the recording for others to look at too, if that's okay with you, Steve.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd love to get a copy too.
Very good, very good. Thanks, everyone, and thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.